It's July 2024 and I'm in the Derbyshire market town of Chesterfield, famous for its open market and its twisted spire. On the edge for Peak District National Park, at the confluence of the Hipper and Rother rivers, close to the border with Yorkshire and therefore the northern extent of the Midlands, the town of Chesterfield can, just from its name, trace its history back to the Roman era. Originally the site of a transitory Roman fort in the 1st century, the Anglo-Saxon name for the town comes from the Old English for a Roman fort, caster, and a pasture, feld. The town received its market charter in 1204 from King John, granting the town the same privilege as neighbouring Nottingham and Derby. Even to today, the market is held 3 days a week in one of the largest open-air markets in Britain, with stalls either side of a market hall. A further charter was granted by Elizabeth I at the end of the 16th century, creating a corporation for the town that set the governance of Chesterfield right up until the Municipal Corporations Act of 1835 turned Chesterfield into a borough. The town sits on a coalfield, but surprisingly it took the arrival of the railways for mining to start in the town, with the discovery of the first seam of coal only being made during the tunnelling for the Clay Cross Tunnel just south of the town, whilst the Derby to Leeds railway line was being constructed by George and Robert Stephenson at the end of the 1830s. George Stephenson moved to Chesterfield during the construction work and remained living in the town right up until his death in 1848. Today a statue of him stands outside Chesterfield railway station. The town prospered, with mining a mainstay of the economy of the town, along with manufacturing. Tree bore mints and the tunnel boring machines that built the Channel Tunnel were both created in Chesterfield. But as with many colliery towns in Britain, the economy started a downward spiral with a systematic closure of the collieries compounded by deindustrialisation, with many of the manufacturing companies located around the town disappearing or relocating. Trebor were first merged with Sheffield-based Licorice Allsorts Beermoth Bassets before being folded into Cadbury Trebor Bassets. By 1998, the Victoria Foundry, which had turned out over 500 tunnel boring machines, had been closed and sold off for redevelopment into housing by its new Norwegian owners. Today, the employment base in the town has moved towards the services sector, with jobs in retail and administration, including the Royal Mail's pension service, and the nearby distribution and operations base for Fraser's Group, previously Sports Direct, in Shirebrook, on the site of the former Shirebrook Colliery. The current borough of Chesterfield dates to the 1st of April 1974, when the reforming of local government in England and Wales created new boundaries of the boroughs, amalgamating the municipal borough of Chesterfield with the urban district of Staveley and the parish of Brimington, with the 1938 built town hall in Chesterfield becoming the seat of government for the new borough. But the most famous building in the town is the Church of St Mary's and All Saints. Building began in 1234 on the site of an earlier Anglo-Saxon church, though the bulk of the work was carried out during the 1300s. One of the final parts of the construction was the addition of the spire in around 1362, taking the height of the building to 288 foot. Today the spire twists by 45 degrees and also leans, the tip being 9 foot 6 inches off the centre. There are various suggestions for why the spire is crooked, but one of the likely suspects is the Black Death, which occurred whilst the church was being constructed. By the time it came to building the spire, so many skilled workers and their knowledge had been lost to the disease that there was insufficient to correctly construct it, though it may also have been the insufficient use of cross-bracing or the use of unseasoned green timber that subsequently warped as it dried out, both again possible due to the loss of skills following the plague. What certainly didn't help was the genius idea of adding 33 tons of lead sheeting to the spire on top of the already dodgy 14th century bracing in the 17th century. The uneven expanding and contracting of the lead over the centuries from sunlight is also likely to have had an impact. 5 miles to the east of Chesterfield is another historic market and colliery town, Bolsover. Mentioned in the Domesday Book and looked over by a 12th century castle, the town is perhaps most famous for its former MP for 49 years from 1970 to 2019, the Beast of Bolsover, Dennis Skinner, who regularly tormented Tory ministers and shadow ministers during his years on the green benches of the House of Commons. The current castle dates from the early 17th century, when Sir Charles Cavendish started building a castle designed for elegant living rather than defence on the site of an older medieval castle. It's not known when the original castle was constructed, but in 1155 the castle became crown property when William Peveril the Younger died, though the Ferrers family, the Earls of Derby, laid claim to the Peveril property. During the reign of Henry II, he spent £116, about £200,000 in 2024 prices, on building at the castles of Bolsover and Peveril in Derbyshire during the Great Revolt, an uprising by his eldest sons, Henry and Richard, he of the Lionheart, and a group of rebel barons. Younger son John eventually ascended to the throne in 1199 after Richard's death. William de Ferrers had maintained the claim of the Earls of Derby to the Peveril estates, and he paid John 2,000 marks for the lordship of the Peak, but John still retained possession of the castles. Facing his own rebellion after his failure to uphold Magna Carta, John finally gave the castles to Ferrers in 1216 to secure his support in the face of a countrywide rebellion by the barons who'd previously forced him to Runnymede to sign Magna Carta. However, the soldiers looking after the castle under the control of Brian de Lees refused to hand them over, and despite Lees and Ferrers being rare supporters of the king, John gave Ferrers permission to use force to take the castle, for it took until a siege in 1217 before the castle was finally under Ferrers' control. William only held on to the castles for 6 years before they were returned to the crown, at which point £33, £60,000 today, was spent on repairing the damage that Earl Derby had caused during the siege. The castle expanded, adding 4 more towers and regular repairs to both the keep and curtain walls taking place over the next 20 years. However, by the end of the century, the castle and its surrounding manor were granted to a series of local farmers, and under their custodianship, the castle fell into a state of disrepair. In 1553, Edward VI granted the ruins of Bolsover Castle to Francis Talbot, 5th Earl of Shrewsbury. His grandson Gilbert Talbot sold the ruins of Bolsover Castle to his stepbrother and brother-in-law, Sir Charles Cavendish, in 1590. Charles employed builder and designer Robert Smithson, who'd worked on his mother's small pad Hardwick Hall, to design what is today called the Little Castle, though neither of them lived to see the completion of the work, with Robert dying in 1614 and Charles passing away in 1617. Building work continued under Cavendish's 2 sons, William and John, who took additional inspiration from the Italian-inspired work of Indigo Jones. Work on the Little Castle was finally completed around 1621. Unfortunately, any further building work was interrupted by the small matter of the civil wars of 1642 to 1651, during which time the castle was taken by the parliamentarians who slighted it and it fell into a ruinous state. After the land was returned to them, William Cavendish added a new hall and stateroom to the terraces range, and by the time of his death in 1676 the castle had been fully restored, including upgrading the state apartments in the terraces range to support royal visits, and the construction of a riding house range, so Cavendish could show off his passion for training horses in dressage. However, the grandeur didn't even survive a generation, with William's son Henry dismantling the state apartments. Within 100 years of William's death, the terrace range was already in ruins. The castle passed through the Cavendish family and then by marriage into the Bentinck family, the Earls and Dukes of Portland, who used it as one of their seats before turning it into a tenanted vicarage. By 1883, the castle was uninhabited and falling into ruin. The decay of the buildings only accelerated after 1889, with the opening of the Bolsover Colliery causing mining substance, as well as the pollution attacking the stone. In 1945, the 7th Duke of Portland, William Cavendish Bentinck, gave the ruins to the nation, and work was undertaken by the Ministry of Works to stabilise the buildings in preparation for opening them to the public. Today, the property is in the care of English Heritage, and almost all the site is open to look around, including both the ruins and restored Little Castle, along with the gardens and wall walk that run around the edge of the Little Castle. Next time, I continue my exploration from Chesterfield by catching the Peak Explorer open-top bus into the Peak District to visit caves of a unique gemstone found only in this small part of the Peaks. And visit a town synonymous with puddings and tarts.